All right, Shabbos say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Yanky and Aliza Statman, and Yitzy and Rebecca Statman for dedicating the Sherman Drushos this month, the commemoration of the first yarzheit of their sister, Menucha Shaindl Yehudis, Zichron Libracha, Bas Dovid Yosef. To thank Shmuel and Robyn Korobkin for dedicating the Sherm this month in commemoration of the 25th yahrzeit of Rabin's mother, Pessa Mira, Bas Chaim, Zichron Libracha. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. With that, let us begin. Again, I want to thank also Rabbi Richter again for giving such a wonderful shir Baruch Hashem last week. It is a great schos Baruch Hashem to be back with all of you, starting a new parak today. I want to begin by saying today's daf is nothing like yesterday's. Okay, so we'll put that out there. So I'll say we are back. Sorry. We're going to have record attendance today. Right? Okay. So I'll say, so let's go. So new parak in Meretz Hashem. We'll say today's daf is Chaf Aleph 21. We are starting at the bottom of Chaf Amud Beis 20b. So we'll say actually a really fascinating sugi ahead of us today. Arba Nedarim Itiru Chachamim. There are 4 different types of Nedarim that the Chachamim, that the sages were matter permitted. Now, we'll say, if you take a look at Rashi, so Rashi points out over here, what does it mean that they permitted? Rashi says, below shum she'ela. Actually, the Ran says the same idea. If you look 3 lines up from the bottom of the Ran, the Farish B'Gemara, shemutar me'eleyen, below heter chacham. There are 4 types of nedarim that essentially are automatically permitted. Now, we'll say, saying that a neder is automatically permitted is essentially saying what? They're not nedarim. They're not nedarim. Now we understand that although it is phrased as a neder, the vower did not really have intention to go ahead and make a vow, and therefore essentially they're non-vows. They're non-vows. So because they're non-vows, there is no mechanism that is necessary in order to release the vower from his neder. Again, because there was no neder. What are these 4 categories? Nidre zeruzin. Again, we'll read them now, then we're going to define each category. Nidre zeruzin. Shabbos says, so nidre zeruzin we'll see means like zrizos, a neder that was made in order to get someone else to take action. We'll see in just a moment. Nidre havai, which Shabbos say literally means again nedarim of nothingness, right, emptiness. Nidre shkagos, accidental nedarim. Nidre onsin, and nedarim that were taken in extenuating circumstances. Now, Shabbos say our Mishnah only focuses here on the first category. So nidre zeruzin ketzad. What's a good example of nidre zeruzin? So once again, using the word zrizos, so nidre zeruzin is a neder I undertake in order to get someone else to take action. So this is a great case. So what's an example? Ketzad. Here we go. Haya mocher chayfetz va'amar konim she'eni poches la min hasela va'ala omer konim she'eni mosiflecha ala shekel. So we'll say, watch this case. There's Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is selling an object. Let's keep it easy. Reuven is selling a pot. Right? Shimon is in the market to buy a pot. So what happens? Reuven says, I konam, which we always say is right. Remember, what's konam? Right? Konam is a kinui. Right? Konam is a similar equivalent term for carbon. So Reuven says, essentially, konam, I hereby take a neder that I'm not going to sell you this pot for less than a sela. Now, just so we get our terms over here, Rashi says a sela is 4 dinarim. 4 dinar. So Reuven says, now the way the wording works is like this. So Reuven says, this pot should become usher to me like a carbon if I sell it to you for less than 4 slaim. Okay, so Reuven the seller is taking a neder that he is not going to sell this pot to Shimon for less than 4 slaim. Okay, 4 dinar. 4 dinar, thank you. So now what happens? Now Shimon takes his own neder. Right? What does Shimon say? Omer, konim sheni mosif lecha ala shekel. So it's very interesting. So remember again, shekel is 2 dinarim. Shimon, the purchaser, says, I take a neder that I'm not going to go ahead and purchase this pot for more than 2 dinar. For more than 2 dinar. So we'll say, so now each party has made their own neder. Now we'll say, just to understand again the mechanics of the lashon. When you say konim she'eni poches chamin asela, so let's go with Shimon now. When Shimon says konim she'eni mosef chashekel, which means if I go ahead and I spend more than 2 shekel, right, 2 dinarim on this pot, then ultimately again the pot should be usher to me like a carbon. So they're each going and making a neder. So we'll say, what do you do in a situation like this? Top of Chaf Aleph. What's the halacha? Shneim rotzim b'shlosha dinarim. What do we say? What are they doing? They're negotiating. They're negotiating, right? So Reuven is trying to show his negotiating posture by saying, I will not, right? I'm making a neder, I'm not going to sell this for less than 4 dinarim. Shimon is showing his posture, I'm not going to buy this for more than 2 dinarim. So the Mishnah says, what do they both really want? They both really want to settle on 3 dinarim. They both say, okay, so what does this mean? Take a look at the rant. First rant on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Shtein rotzim b'shlosha dinarim, shamochar hayedaitu l'shlosha, v'lo niskavim b'nidra el l'zaris halokeach. So both say, now watch this. When Reuven makes a neder, and essentially he makes a neder that says, I am not going to sell you this pot. I'm making a neder that I'm not going to sell you this pot for less than 4 dinar. They both say, does Reuven have in mind to really make a neder? Does he have in mind to make a neder? No. Right? What is he trying to do? He's trying to move the buyer. That's what he's trying to do. In other words, he thinks that by formulating this, right, by taking a stance that looks like an immovable stance, the price is non-negotiable. What that does is it motivates the buyer to up his ante, to up the ante. Shabbos says, so this is what's called nidre zerizim. The Gemara understands, the Mishnah understands, neither party actually has in mind to take a neder. But rather what they're both trying to do is they're formulating their position in the form of a neder in order to go ahead and get the other party to take action, to be zoris, to have zrizos. So finish up that round. He says, Shamochar hayadaito, tap on Chafal and Aleph, Shamochar hayadaito l'shlosha, v'lonis kabein b'nidra el l'zaris halokeach shalo ya'amod al daito. Remember, Reuven, the seller, doesn't really have in mind to make a neder. Rather, he's just trying to get the purchaser, Shimon, to go ahead and move past his 2 dinar price point. So to Shimon, when Shimon makes a neder, I'm not going to purchase it for more than 2 dinarim. He doesn't really mean that. Rather, what is he trying to do? He's trying to get the seller, Reuven, to come down from 4 dinar. So the point over here is, even though both Reuven and Shimon are both making nedarim, neither really has in mind to take a neder. This is what's called, what they both have in mind to do is cause the other one to move from their entrenched position. So therefore again, that's why the Ran points out, therefore again, there is no neder, because it's clear that neither party has in mind to really make a neder. He says, Now, both say, we're going to see something very interesting. The beauty of the Ran is the Ran gives you like a panoramic view already in the Mishnah. We're going to see that one of the interesting things that when it comes to Nedarim and Shavuos is that sometimes we have to go after what you say and not after what you mean. So I will say this is, and the term that Chazal used for this is Dvarim Shebalev Einam Dvarim. Whatever you're thinking, that's irrelevant. We can only go by what? By what you're saying. I will say, by the way, which is an incredible yisod in life in general. Like sometimes we say things and we expect people to know how to interpret our words. Well, no. In other words, if you want people to know what you mean, then say it in a way that conveys the proper meaning. Don't expect people to be Rashi and Ran on your words and try to figure out, maybe he meant this, maybe he meant that. Again, that's why a person has to be so careful with what they say and how they say it. Because people are to be taken at their spoken word and not some interpretation of that spoken word. Amen. The Gemara understands over here, the Ran is explaining over here, that halacha l'maisa, this is not a dvarim shebalev. What this is common business practices. This happens all of the time. And again, it's common for the buyer and the purchaser to both phrase their positions as a neder, but the halacha understands neither is really making a neder. They're just expressing their current position with the hope of using the word neder to get the other party to move. So both saying, this is the first case. So therefore, again, let's play this out. So therefore, Reuven made his neder, I'm not going to sell this to you for less than 4 dinar. Shimon made his neder, I'm not going to buy this for more than 2 dinar. And then what ends up happening, they end up settling on 3 dinar. The purchase goes through. What do Reuven and Shimon have to do regarding their nedarim? What do they have to do? Nothing. Why? This is what's called nidre zeruzin. It's not a real neder. Good, beautiful. We'll say that's category 1. So it says the Gemara, Arba'an nedarim nitiru chachamim. So we'll say, so remember again, the lashon of the Mishnah was that there are 4 nedarim, 4 categories of nedarim that the chachamim permitted. Amr Rabbi Abba bar Mama Rabbi Ami. Amr Mishmei Rabbi Hudin Asiya. Man tana arba'an nedarim. We'll say, whose opinion, who is the Tana of this Mishnah? Because remember again, the Mishnah does not have attribution. It's a stam Mishnah. So whenever we have a stam Mishnah, we like to know who is the author of this particular Mishnah. So who is the author over here? So we'll say, this is so fascinating. So the Gemara says, who is? Rabbi Huda. It's Rabbi Huda. Why? What does Rabbi Huda say? You see, the Gemara says, Da'ar mishum Rabbi Tarfa, only olam ein echa mehem nazir, lefi shalom nitna naziros ela lahafla. Shabbos say, let me tell you this case outside. Again, we're going to get to it in Meretz Hashem and Mesechas Nazir. This is fascinating. Shabbos say, imagine the following situation, right? So I'm standing with Ruvain on the street, and we see a guy coming. And I say to Ruvain, oh, Ruvain, that's Shimon. Ruvain says, no, that's not Shimon. Shabbos say, now people get into an argument sometimes over things that are really just totally inconsequential and irrelevant. Well, we get into an argument with this, right? And I say, I am so sure that this is Ruvain, that when he comes in, it's Ruvain, I hereby undertake a neder naziros. And Ruvain's, I'm sorry, I'm mixing up the names, I'm sorry, Shimon. Right, so let me start again. Right, I'm standing on the corner with Ruvain. We see a guy in the distance. I say to Ruvain, oh, that's Shimon. Right, Shimon says, Ruvain says, no, that's not Shimon. I say to Ruvain, we get into an argument. I say, I'm so positive that it is Shimon, that again, when it comes here and it's Shimon, I hereby undertake a neder naziros. Right? So Ruvain says, I'm so positive that it's not Shimon, that if it's not Shimon, I undertake a neder naziros. So I will say, so there's a machlokes over here. So obviously, one of us is going to be right, one of us is going to be wrong. So the shaila is the person who's right, does he become a nazir or not? So this is it's a fundamental machlokes Rabbi Huda and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Huda holds there's no neder naziros in this situation. Why? Rabbi Huda is of the opinion, the only way to become a nazir is through an explicit articulation. The problem over here with this articulation is what? Is that it's rooted in a t'nai, it's rooted in a condition. If it's Shimon, then I'll be a nazir. If it's Shimon, then I'll be a nazir. Rabbi Huda is of the opinion that the only way to affect a neder naziros is with an explicit articulation. So therefore, the Gemara wants to suggest this as follows: that halacha l'maisa, the same Rabbi Huda who holds that nazirus could only happen with an explicit articulation, also holds that the four categories in our Mishnah, are also not proper nedarim. Why? Because they also lack the explicit kite, normally necessary in order to go ahead and affect a neder. Take a look at the Ran for just a moment. I see the Ran on the left hand side, in the intermediate lines over here. In the intermediate lines, 3, 6, about 8 lines in. Look what he writes. And remember again, we've already seen from the beginning of the Masechta the connection between Nazirus and Nedarim, and effectively whatever is going to be true by Nazir will also be true by Neder. Vadin l'nedarim, the iskish l'nazirus. Telo chayil imkein yikabel below t'nai. Hilchach mocher v'lokeach shetaluv nidram b'tnai, afa pisha avru al t'noim lo chayli nidrayi. So if you think about it, in our Mishnah, let's say the nidrei zeruzin is kind of the same idea. Both of the buyer and the seller, Reuben and Shimon, the buyer and the seller, are both undertaking a neder, but the neder is based on a t'nai. Right? In other words, the seller says, if I sell it to you for less than 4 dinarim, it's usher to me. Buyer says, if I buy it for more than 2 dinarim. So again, the neder doesn't work. Why doesn't the neder work? The Gemara wants to suggest the neder doesn't work because this is the position of Rabbi Huda. And Rabbi Huda holds that nedarim, just like nazirus, only works when there is an explicit articulation. Or in other words, if a neder or a nazirus is in any way anchored in a t'nai, it doesn't take effect. Nebuchadnezzar like, where does Rabbi Huda get this idea that halacha l'maisa, nazirus and nedarim only work with an explicit articulation? This is from the pasuk. Ish kiyafli. So again, Rabbi Huda darshans yafli means ultimately explicit articulation. Good. Rava says not necessarily. Afilu tema rabbanan. They will say the truth is our Mishnah could reflect the view even according to Rabbanan. I will say now the Rabbanan are the one who argue on Rabbi Huda in the case in Nazir, and they hold that in this case, whoever is right will become a Nazir. Right? In other words, whether it was Shimon, wasn't Shimon, either me or Reuven is going to be right, so whoever's right becomes a Nazir. Because the Rabbanan hold that you could have a Nazirus that takes effect as a result of the Tanai. But the Rabbanan could still be the author of our Mishnah. Why? Mikatani shnehen ratzu. Does it say ultimately again shnehen ratzu? They both want. Rather, it says, Shneihan rotzin katani. Now, Rabbi say, now what does this mean? Take a look at the Ran again. It's actually quite interesting. Look at the Ran. Rava Amar afilu timra bara mikatan shtein ratzu. Kilomar, demasnisin denidre zeruzin, lav mishum haflahi, ela mishum sheshamu chachamim daitam shalom nadru bedafka, ela lazaris. So Rabbi say, the Gemara makes an interesting observation. So Rava says, the truth is, our Mishnah has nothing to do with Tanai. The reason why Nidre Zerazin ultimately, again, are not a Neder both sides, because Chazal understood this is the way people do business. This is the way people do business. In other words, there's no Neder over here, because this discussion doesn't even enter into the realm of Nedarim at all. It's not a Neder. It's not a Neder. Chazal understood that in the marketplace, right, in the shuk, in the marketplace, this is how people talk. They make extreme statements that make it sound like they're immovable on the price point. They even attach a neder to it to show their seriousness to it. But again, 2 minutes later, they agree on a different price and they're best of friends. So because Chazal understood that this is the way that people do business, it's not a neder at all. In fact, again, if you look at the Ran says, oh yeah, Rava Amar Filu Tim Rabbanon Kikatani, I'm sorry, Shnei and Rotze Katani, Demashma Metchila Vatzov. So I will say, if it would be about reaching an agreement and having like a new mindset, they would have said Shneim Ratzu. The fact that it says Shneihan Rotzin, they both say the lashon of Rotzin means this is what they were agreeable to the entire time. In other words, when Reuven the seller originally says, I hereby take an neder to answer the item to me if I sell it for less than 4 dinar. At the time that he's making that neder, what is he thinking in his mind? What is he thinking in his mind? I'm good with 3. I'm good with 3, right? And when Shimon goes ahead and says, I hereby take a neder if I purchase this for any more than 2 dinar, what is he thinking in his mind? I'm good with 3. I'm good with 3. So because that Rabbi say, again, what the Gemara is pointing out over here is, there's no neder. You see, the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon by Nazir is a machlokes in the mechanics of a neder nazirus. Can a neder nazirus occur with a tanai or not? Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Nazirus can only apply with explicit articulation. The Rabbanon say yes. So the Gemara wanted to say, oh, who's our Mishnah according to? To which Rabbi says, our Mishnah is according to everyone. Do you know why? Because in our Mishnah, Rabbi said the whole chap is, it's not a neder. It's not a neder. Because this we assume from the beginning that this is just business posturing. No one undertook a neder here at all. Incredible. Amar Rabbi Rabashi, Amar lo tfei mesela. So we'll say now an interesting variation of this case. Some of the Rabbi Rabashi, so Rabbi Rabashi, he says, Amar lo tfei mesela, v'hala Amar betzil mishekel, nidrahavi, o zeruz and havi. Now both say, take a look at the Ran. So the Ran is 5 lines up from the bottom. This is actually very interesting. Amar li tfei mesela. So look at the Ran. He says, Kilomar, shamar lo konim she'eni poches lo lucha, minasela upruta, v'lo kenach amar konim she'eni mosif lucha, al shekel pachos pruta. So we'll say, now watch this. What if Reuven the seller said, I will not sell this to you for less than a sela and a pruta. So we'll say, let's say he says, I will not sell this to you. I will not sell this to you for less than 4 dinar and the sela. Okay? And now, and the pruta. 4 dinar and the pruta. Right? And now the purchaser, Shimon, says, I will not buy this from you. I will not purchase it from you for less than a shekel, less a pruta. So we'll say, what's the difference in this case? In this case, they're using much more exact amounts. So we'll say, in the case of the Mishnah, so Reuven was saying, I'm not going to sell it to you for less than 4 dinar. Shimon saying, I'm not going to buy it for less than for more than 2 dinar. Okay. What happens if they get into more specific amounts? I'm not going to sell it to you for less than 4 dinar plus a pruta. And Shimon says, I'm not going to sell it to you, I'm not going to purchase it for less than 2 dinar minus a pruta. Right? So what happens so when they get into that type of specific amounts, do we still say, look at the Gemara. So Gemara says, Nidra Havi. So now do we say that once you get into such specific amounts, maybe that is a neder. Maybe that's a neder. Oh, Zeruzin Havi. Or maybe not. Maybe still, again, both say, this is business passion. Both say, Lashon of Zeruzin means they're each trying to get each other to move. It's not really a neder. So we learn this. Here we go. So both say, very interesting case. Listen to this. So I'll say, I want Reuven to come over to my house. Right? I want to invite Reuven over to a Suda, and I'm shepherding him to come over to the house. Reuven doesn't want to come to my house. I both say, not because he doesn't like me, But Lamaisi, maybe he just feels I don't have enough to give him. He just doesn't want to impose. So what does he say? Va'amar lo, konim beischa shani nichnas, tipas tzonin shani toim. Reuven makes a neder. What does he say? Your home should be konam to me for my entering to it. So essentially, Reuven makes a neder that I'm not allowed to enter your home, and I can't even drink a drop of cold water. So he makes a pretty extreme neder. What's talacha? Mutar likanis labeso v'lishtos hemenotzonein. Reuven's allowed to enter into my house, and he's allowed to also drink some cold water, a drop of cold water. Why? Shalonis kavin ze ela l'shum achila ushtia. Because I will say, what did Reuven mean to do when he went ahead and he made that neder? What did he mean to do? Now, he made a neder. But what did he mean to make a neder for? Eating and drinking. Right? In other words, Reuven doesn't want to come over to my house for a meal. That's what he doesn't want. So therefore, again, he makes a neder that he's not going to step foot into my house and he's not even going to take a drop of cold water. But Gemara understands, he doesn't really mean to prohibit his entry into my home, nor does he mean to prohibit something minuscule like a drop of water. What he means to prohibit to himself is the consumption of my food. That's what he means to prohibit. Shabbos say, therefore, even though he phrased the neder as entry into my home, as drinking a drop of the water, Lamaisi, he's allowed to enter into the home and he's allowed to drink a drop of water. Why? Again, because Reuven's intention was only to prohibit some eating and drinking. Says the Yerba, 1 second. Take a look at the Ran, last lines of the Ran. The Ran says, Alma, afa gav dinoches lediyuka. V'shenisrachek harbe mimasha hayarotze chavero shiyochal shari asra afilu drisa sarayel shtias sonin hafilu hachi aminam delav bidafka nadar. So we'll say, I just want to point out, what do you see from here? You see from here that even when a person, well, actually, let's finish up the Gemara. So the Gemara says, V'amai v'atipas sonin kamar. He said a drop of cold water. El mishtoi inish hachi. So I will say, because sometimes what ends up happening is when a person wants to prohibit something, he uses a more extreme form of lashon. But I will say, see, what's interesting over here is the Gemara understands what Reuven is trying to do is preclude himself from eating my food and drinking my wine. That's what he's precluding himself from. But Lamaisi uses a more extreme lashon in order to go ahead and make that point. But the more extreme lashon is viewed as neder hyperbole and not exact neder lashon. So the Gemara suggests, so too over here, so too in our case. When Reuven says, I'm not going to sell this to you for more than what? For less than, 4 dinar and a pruta, right? And Shimon says, I'm not going to purchase it for any more than 2 nidarim less a pruta. They don't mean that. It's still nidre zeruzin. So the Gemara says, hachanami. So the Gemara says, hachanami mishtai inshi. So if you go back to the Ran for just a moment, the Ran says, hachanami afa gav da'amar. Actually, the Ran turns the page. Afa gav da'amar chad tfei min sela. V'idach b'tzir min shekel zeruzin uvalav dachas. Therefore, what the Gemara wants to suggest is that even when they use more exact amounts, that's no different than when Reuven goes ahead and takes a neder and says, I hereby take a neder, I'm not entering into your home, I'm not drinking a drop of your water. We look at that as neder hyperbole, right? And it does not mean to actually prohibit those items. So, Hachi, Amarle, I'm sorry, Amarle, so, Chaf Aleph on the base, right? El Mishtai Inish, Hachanami Mishtai Inish Hachi, Amarle, Mi Dami, how can you go ahead and compare the cases? So what the Gemara is suggesting is like this. We're equating the two cases now, right? Equating the two cases. We want to say, just like in the case, right? Tell Reuven, I'm pressuring Reuven, come eat by me, come eat by me, come eat by me. Reuven doesn't want to eat by me. So what does he do? He takes a neder. What's the lashon of the neder? The lashon of the neder is, konam, I am not allowed to enter into your house, not even walk into your house, and I can't even take a drop of cold water from you. How do we interpret that neder? And both say, now it is a neder, but how do we interpret it? We interpret it only on achila and shtia. He did not mean to prohibit that in a hyperbolic way, right? Literally what he said. So to what the Gemara wants to suggest is, when Reuven, so we'll say, let's take one more step back. What does everyone agree with? Everyone agrees in the case of where Reuven the seller says, I'm not going to sell it for less than 4 dinar. And Shimon the buyer says, I'm not buying it for more than 2 dinar. Everyone agrees. What do we call that? Nidre zeruzin. What's the status of nidre zeruzin? Not nedarim. It's just posturing. What's our shaila? When they both get a bit more specific. Right? When Reuven says, I'm not going to sell it to you for less than 4 dinar and a pruta. and Shimon says, I'm not purchasing it for less than 2 shekel minus a pruta. Once we get into those specific amounts, is that nidrei zerizin? Or maybe that's a real neder. So Gemara wants to compare the pruta cases, ultimately with the guy who makes the hyperbolic neder not to enter his friend's home. Right? Reuben says, I'm not entering into your home, I'm not drinking your water. So Gemara says the same way that we don't use that hyperbolic statement as a literal neder, so too over here with the use of the prutas by the purchase amount. Right? By the purchase amount, we'll also interpret that as a bit of neder hyperbole and just include that in nidrei zerizin. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. Me dummy. How can you compare the cases? Here we go. Top of Chafal Mabeis, first line, 21b. So Gabeit Sonan, when it comes ultimately again to the cold water, here's the problem. Tzadikim omrim ma'at ba'osin harbe. Here's the problem. Maybe, first we'll take a look at the Ran. Mi dummy Gabeit Sonan, tzadikim omrim ma'at ba'osin harbe. A tzadik, tzadikim, they say little and they do much. Now, what does that mean? Look at the Ran. Second line in the Ran. Hilchach nistafi hain di imodele betipas tzonin shelo yachilenu harbe umishum hachi amar tipas tzonin v'lav dafka. So both say, here's the difference. You see, when I'm inviting Reuven in, so Reuven knows that how does a Jew do achnasas archim, right? It starts with a little, and ultimately, again, before I know it, it's going to be a lot. So Reuven feels that in order not to impose upon me, he has to go ahead and even make an extreme statement like I'm not even going to have a drop of water. But he doesn't literally mean that. Instead, what he's just trying to prevent is me giving him anything, or him partaking of anything of mine. That's why I both said we understand that what's Reuven's intention. Reuven's intention is to take a neder, not to eat my food. The reason he frames it in a more extreme way is because the derech of tzaddikim is, give them an inch, they'll take a foot, right? Give the tzaddik an opportunity to do a little bit of achnasas archim, right? It starts with a glass of water, and before you know it, ultimately again, it's a 10-course meal. I just tell you an amazing mice when I was in the airport yesterday morning. I was getting my luggage, and I was standing next to a guy who just started talking to me. And he told me about, sometimes you run into people who whatever. So he was telling me that he was visiting he was there on business. He was visiting his relatives. It was so beautiful. He told me that he went to his relatives on Shabbos nights for dinner, and he walked in a little bit late. And told me, he said, I'm not so religious. He walked in a little bit late, and he said that his relatives were watching the soccer game. Okay. So he walks in, they shut off the television, everybody puts on a yarmulke, and they said, could we go, Sfardim are very, very different like that. There's something so different that we Ashkenazim could learn from in terms of just an appreciation of tradition. No matter what you do observe or don't observe, but just an appreciation of tradition. So he said, no, I'm not so hungry. So they said, would you like a glass of tea? So he said, sure, I'll take a glass of tea. So he said, it was his mom just when I said, well, this glass of tea, you can't have tea by itself. Right? So what happens? There's some cake. But once we're having cake, did you have dinner? No. He said literally it was a reverse meal. So literally, again, it started with a glass of tea, dessert, main, appetite, like mamish, it was a whole thing. So that's tzaddikim. So ultimately, again, tzaddikim, they start with the right. So Reuben understands that if he takes me up on a glass of water, then before I know it, again, it's an entire meal. Finishing the Ran, but I will say, maybe in the case where Reuven is saying, listen, I'm not going to sell for less than 4 dinar and a pruta. And Shimon is saying, I'm not going to go ahead and purchase for any more than 2 dinar less a pruta. Maybe they're being exact. So the Gemara says, Halkas Vegahava, Dilma Pakos Misela Viosra Shekal Kamar, Uzrizin Havi, O Dilma, Davka Kamar, Vinitra Havi. But both say here, we really don't know. When they get into this level of specificity regarding prices, how do we view this? Do we view this as an actual neder, or is it still called in nidrei zerizin? To which the Gemara says, Tiboy. Both remember again, what does Tiboy mean in Maseches Nedarim? Tegu. So we'll say it's quite interesting. So here's what we have. We have in a case where we're using, I guess we'll call it round numbers. So Reuben says, I take a neder, I will not sell for less than 4 dinar. Shimon says, I take a neder, I'm not going to buy for more than 2 dinar. Everyone agrees that is a case of nidrei zerizin. The shaila is when we get into a situation where they're being much more specific. Reuven, I'm not selling for less than 4 dinar and a pruta. Shimon, I'm not buying for more than 2 dinar less a pruta. So what is that? Is that nidrei zeruzin still, or is that actual? Or is it actual neder? Teiku. Incredible. But I'll just point out something amazing. It's very interesting that the Gemara uses the lashon over here. The Gemara uses lashon over here of tzadikim omrin ma'at va'osin harbe. Right, tzadikim, right? They go ahead and they say little, but they do a lot. So I just want to point out what's happening over here. Just to frame this. So right, I'm inviting Reuven over to my meal. Reuven doesn't want to eat by me. Now both say, see, when we hear that, we kind of automatically assume, why doesn't Reuven want to eat by me? Why not? Because he doesn't like me. So no, let's be down the cuffs. Reuven likes me, I don't like a little guy. Right? So instead, Reuven maybe doesn't want to oppose. He doesn't want to oppose. Or maybe he feels that I don't know, it's me, I'll tell you, like, also, when I was davening by the coastal on Shabbos night, I saw such an amazing, I saw this chassid, and again, the guy was dressed like, clothing looked so tattered, like a shtreimel that was all in disarray, and a bekashet. And he's going over to the American Bachrim, and he's inviting them over for Shabbos meals. And what I wanted to tell the guys was, please don't accept, Bachrim accept anything, right? Anything. Like, if it doesn't move, right, they'll go. Like, it doesn't. And I wanted to say to the guys, like, don't just say you have other plans. Say you have other plans, because I'm telling you, like, this is one of these stories where this guy's kids are not going to eat because they're going to perform the mitzvah of hachnasas archim. It was just so incredible. You literally, like, you saw the most beautiful, beautiful thing. In any event, so I just want to point out what's happening over here. So Reuven's saying no to me. Reuven's saying no. But I'm not taking no for an answer. So what does he do? He makes a neder. Now I will say, so the Gemara says, so why does he frame the neder in such an extreme way? Konam, that I'm not going to go ahead and go into your home. I'm not going to drink a drop of your water. Why does he frame it in such an extreme way? Ultimately, again, because there's a concern, tzadikim omrim ma'at va'osin harbe. That ultimately, again, if he takes a sip of my water, if he knows that I'm allowed to give him water, I'm going to keep giving him more. Rabbi say, why does the Gemara frame this as tzadikim omrim ma'at va'osin tzadikim? That's true, maybe by tzadikim. Who is this talking about? Who's the case about over here? The case is not about tzadikim. Who's the case about? That me and Reuven. Rabbi say, what do you see from here? Here's something amazing. That when a Jew does a mitzvah, he is a tzaddik. So Rabbi said the Baal HaTanya writes this idea. The Baal HaTanya says that we think the definition of tzaddik and rasha is like a composite term. In other words, who's a tzaddik? Well, if you look at my life in any given moment, if I have more mitzvos than averos, I'm a tzaddik. More averos than mitzvos, I'm a rasha. It's kind of like a sum. The Baal HaTanya says that's not the case. Tzaddik and rasha is also based on a snapshot. When I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm a tzaddik. In that moment, I am a tzaddik. When I do an aveira, in that moment, I am a rasha. Which I both say such an incredible way to look at our lives, because sometimes we think about it. We say, I wish I could be a tzaddik, but I'm not going to be a tzaddik. I'll settle for being a good guy. But I say it's not true. Every single time a yid does a mitzvah, by definition, I am a tzaddik. That's what it means when it says over here, tzaddikim omrim ma'at v'oseret. I'm inviting a Jew for achnasas archim. I'm inviting a Jew in that moment, I'm a tzaddik. B'shas ma'asav a mitzvah, what a way to look at ourselves. I daven, I'm a tzaddik. I put on tefillin, I'm a tzaddik. I give tzedakah, I'm a tzaddik. Okay, I speak lashon hara, I'm a rasha. Right? But again, but lamaisa, I always say, but it's incredible. It's not a composite term, right? It's not way my entire life. It's in the moment. Depending on how I behave in that moment creates that moment of self-definition. That's why, again, the Gemara could say, any Jew who's doing hachnasas archim is tzadikim omrim ma'at va'osim harbe. A tzadik, who's talking about tzadikim? Yeah, because anyone who's doing mitzvah hachnasas archim in that moment is considered to be a tzadik. So incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. Rabbi Yehuda Rav Asi. Arbon nedarim halolu tzrichin she'il l'chacham. So both says it's very interesting. Now the Gemara says these nedarim require she'ela. Now both say we're going to get into this a little bit. She'ela means you have to go through a process of revocation. Now both say we're going to get into. There are different processes, right? We've alluded to this during many times over we're only 21 blood in, but now we're going to begin to get into some of these processes. So here's the problem. Shmuel Amar Tani Arba Nedarim Hitiru Chachamim Va'at amrim tzrichim sheila chacham. So that doesn't make sense. I will say the Mishnah says arba nedarim hitiru chachamim, which means what? These 4 categories of nedarim are permitted by Chazal. And I will say we understood what does it mean permitted by Chazal? What does that mean? They're void. In other words, they're not a neder, so they do not require any type of mechanism for annulment or revocation. So now, why are you saying that these nedarim need a she'ela, need to go through a chacham? So Rav Yosef masnil hashmaita b'haylishna. Rav Yosef had a different version of this. I'm Rav Yehuda Rav Asi. Ein chacham rashay lahatir ela ke'ein arba'a nedarim halalu. Wow. Here we go, Rabbi say. So this is going to open the door to a tremendous sugya. So Rav Yosef said like this: that Rav Yehuda saying Rav Asi, that Rabbi say when a chacham wants to be matir a neder, right? When a chacham wants to, we're going to use lashon of permit a neder. When can a chacham permit a neder? Only if the neder is like one of these 4 nedarim. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean if the neder is like one of these 4 nedarim? So let me tell you this outside for just a moment. There are two ways. Well, there's more than 2 ways, but for our purposes right now, let's look at 2 ways that a neder could be permitted. Number 1, I will say, is through charata. What's charata? Charata means I regret having made the neder. Okay? But we're going to see why that works, how that works, but there's a concept like that. I regret having made a neder. And then I will say there's what's called a pesach. A pesach means you find an opening. Now, finding an opening can manifest itself in a couple of different ways, but the simplest example of it would be as follows. Imagine the following situation. I made a neder not to drink wine. Chas v'shalom, right? I made a neder not to drink wine, right? And then what happens? I go to the chacham and I say, you know what? I would like you to go ahead and annul this neder. So the chacham says, tell me, is there some type of opening? I say, you know what? Yeah. Had I realized at the time that I made the neder that I would not be able to make kiddush on wine, I would have never made the neder. So a Pesach means we create an opening. An opening usually comes about when I recognize that there's a piece of information that had I been cognizant of it at the time I made the neder, I would have never made the neder. So I will say, 2 different things. Charata just means it's Tuesday. I haven't had a glass of wine in 26 hours, and life is already getting a bit unbearable, right? So lemaisa, that's called charata. I regret having made the neder, right? I regret it. So Pesach means there's something more profound, there's something more systemically wrong with the neder. In other words, had I been cognizant of a certain piece of information, I would have never made that neder to begin with. So Rabbi says, now listen to this. So this is incredible. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Ravasi, that a chacham, Rabbi say, when you look at the nedarim of our Mishnah, Rabbi say, why? So these nedarim essentially, they have like a quote unquote Pesach. Now, it's not a real Pesach because these nedarim are void from the beginning. But Lamaisa, in these nedarim, essentially, we know that there's something intrinsically wrong with the neder from the beginning. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Ravasi, that whenever a chacham wants to be matir neder, he has to be matir neder like the nedarim in our Mishnah. Namely, charata is not a valid mechanism to annul a neder. Just because the dower regrets having made the neder, that's not enough. There has to be a Pesach. I will say, take a look at the Ran. Here we go. The Ran says, Ein chacham matir ela ke'ein arba nedarim halalu. On the right hand side, about 5 lines into the short lines, the Ran writes, Kolomar, she'eno lahatir becharata, ela bepesach. Sha'neder kishu nitar bepesach, mochiach misocho shehu neder tos. See what I will say? What does a Pesach do? A Pesach says, had I been cognizant of certain information at the time I made the vow, then what? I would have never made it, which means that the neder itself is fundamentally mistaken. Vahavi ke'ein arba nedarim. And I will say, in that respect, then a neder that was made without complete information is like one of the nedarim of our Mishnah. Because we'll say, what's the common denominator about the 4 categories? We won't do the first category. What's the common denominator amongst the 4 categories? They're not nedarim. So too, when the chacham finds a Pesach, when the chacham finds an opening in the neder, it turns out that the neder was taken under mistaken pretenses, mistaken conditions, and therefore the neder could be voided. Aval becharata lo. But ultimately, again, by charata, we'll say, what happens with charata? What's charata? Right, the vower shows up in front of Beis, in front of chacham. What does he say? I regret it. Shkoyach, you regret it. I regret a lot of stuff in life, right? That does not mean that I have the ability to go out and take it back, right? Right? So charata, we're going to see charata is the lowest form, the lowest bar for potential revocation. So the idea the Gemara is pointing out over here is charata is not a valid form of revocation or annulment. Rather, there has to be a Pesach. Finish up the other Pesach mecharata. We'll say, here we go. Now you see why Pesach, finding an opening, is stronger than remorse, than charata. The fisha kol neder shinita b'Pesach harei hanoder omer shafilu b'tchila kishenadar ilu hayanosin aliba osa Pesach lo hayanoder v'nimtza nidro b'tas. So we'll say, when you annul a neder with a Pesach, what does a Pesach do? The Pesach says, had I been cognizant of the information that I know now then, right? Had I been cognizant of that information at the time I made the vow, then what? Had I known that I can't make Kiddush on wine Friday night, I would have never made the neder. Oh, so that's powerful. That's powerful. What that says now is that the entire, in other words, essentially, I've eroded the entire authenticity of the neder itself. Abal neder shunita b'charata, finishing the Ran. But I will say, if all you come to the basin with is with remorse, I will say, see, when I say I regret it, what does that mean? What does that mean, I regret it? I regret it when? I regret it now. Now, the truth is, I was fully cognizant of what I was doing at the time I made the neder, but I just regret having done it. Shkoyach. Okay, got it. You regret having done it. I will say, the problem is, charata does not erode the fundamental authenticity of the neder. Pesach erodes the fundamental authenticity, effectiveness of the neder. It turns out that the neder really was taken under a certain mistaken understanding. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, that creates an opportunity for revocation or annulment. Incredible. So let's go back to the Gemara. This is some stories. I have a lot of stories. The guy who came before Rav Huna. Amrlei, libcha lecha. He says, tell me, was your heart settled with you when you took the neder? Now, if you take a look at the Ran says, Kilomar, haya libcha miyushav alecha b'shash nadarta, v'gam achshav ino tov nederecha. Were you okay? In other words, were you in a good state of mind when you made the neder? Amrlei lo. And he said no. He said, at the end of the day, I was not of sound mind when I made the neder. If that's the case, Amrlei lo b'shariyeh. And therefore, again, Abosai, ultimately, again, Rav Huna permitted the neder. And Abosai, this is actually a case of charata. This is a case of charata, according to the Ran. Right? What's happening over here is Rav Huna is saying, charata does work. Charata does work. If you look at Amrlei lo, Kelmer shalom mitoch yishav adas nadati b'tchila ulufichach ani mischaret. So we'll say, now the Ran points out that maybe this is a different kind of charata. Maybe Rabbi say there's two kinds of charata. This is actually interesting. There's present remorse and there's retrospective remorse. In other words, present remorse says, right now I regret it. So retrospective remorse says, the truth is, even at the time I made the neder, I wasn't of sound mind. So I really regret ever having made it because I wasn't in the right frame of mind. Again, so just think about it. So far what we have, I will say, is Pesach, right? And now the Gemara is according to Rabbi Yehuda Dovid Yosef. Pesach works, charata doesn't work. Because annulling a neder with a Pesach is similar to the Nedarim in our Mishnah. I know that sounds strange, because the Nedarim in our Mishnah don't work. The reason why the Nedarim in our Mishnah don't work is why? Why? Because I understand from the beginning they weren't Nedarim. A Pesach is kind of like that as well. A Pesach says, there's a piece of information that you have now, that had you had that piece of information at the time you made the neder, then what? You would have never made the neder. Everyone agrees that Pesach works. Rav Yehuda named Rav Yosef says, charata doesn't work. Now Rav Yosef comes along Rav Huna, and Rav Huna says, maybe Allah Chalamai says different kinds of charata. There's retrospective charata, there's present charata. Hahuda asla kamei d'Rab Rav Huna. We'll see the Allah Chalamai says all of this. Hahuda asla kamei d'Rab Rav Huna. Because the guy came before Rav Huna. Amrlei. So listen to this. So the guy made a neder. Right? He wanted to have the neder revoked. What happened? Amrlei. Ilu haya asara b'nei adam shefayisucha ba'osa shah minadarta. If there were 10 people to calm you down at the time you made the neder, would you still have made the neder? Amar lei lo. He said, no, I would have never made the neder, and therefore, again, based on this, the hitiru. And I will say, what's the heter over here? Take a look at the first white line in the Ran. He says, V'ika degaris kasara postchan becharata v'akol ol tamach. So we'll say, so again, the Ran has two different versions of reading this. This, once again, could either be a case of charata, or ultimately, again, a case of Pesach. I will say, let's go with the idea, the reading, that this is a case of Charata as well. So, Tanya, Rabbi Huda Omer, Omrim lo la'adam, leiv ze'alecha. So, im amar lav, matirin also. So, ultimately, again, same idea, I will say. So, I want to point out over here, what the Gemara is doing is, after the Gemara got finished saying that halacha l'maisa, you can only annul a neder with a Pesach, not charata. So the Gemara gives other examples of opinions who say that charata works as well. In the world of charata, we now see two different forms of charata. This present charata. What's present charata? Guy shows up in Beis and says, I regret ever having made the neder. Okay? Second form of charata, we'll call retrospective charata. I wasn't in the right frame of mind when I made the neder. So again, all these different cases swirling around. So the Gemara tells this story over here. Rabbi Yehuda says, we say to the guy, Leiv ze alecha, were you of sound mind? I will say again, Leiv ze alecha is also the same type of lashon. Im amar lav, if he says, no, I was not of sound mind, I am not of sound mind, then halacha l'maisa matirin also. We ultimately again are matir the neder. So I will say, so again, what it sounds like halacha l'maisa again is this retrospective charata, is this present charata? We'll stop over here for today, but Amir will say we will continue this. So what we've just now entered into are the mechanics of revocation. We know that Pesach works according to everyone, and Pesach seems to take its cue from our Mishnah. The shaila is, does charata work? And if charata does work, what type of charata is effective? Shkoyach.